straight to breaking news, and we're hearing just in the last few minutes that the professional wrestling and entertainment star Hulk Hogan has died.
For decades, Terry Bollea, better known as Hulk Hogan, was one of the biggest names in professional wrestling. To millions of fans, he wasn't just a champion. He was the man who transformed wrestling into a global phenomenon. But after his sudden death in July 2025, the story surrounding his final days took a far darker turn. When investigators and federal authorities finally began piecing together what happened, they uncovered a timeline filled with unanswered questions. A major neck surgery just weeks before his death. A medical history far more complicated than most people realized. And a series of events in his final days that didn't seem to fit the official story. Then the rumors grew even darker. Claims of hidden secrets, mysterious phone calls, and evidence the public was never supposed to see spread rapidly across the internet. But how much of it was true? And what really happened to Hulk Hogan in his final days? Let's find out. The morning everything stopped. On a humid morning in late July, emergency dispatchers in Clearwater, Florida, took a frantic 911 call from the Bollea residence. Paramedics reached the mansion on El Dorado Avenue within minutes and started working immediately. They used every technique they had to restart a heart that wouldn't respond. By the time Terry Bollea arrived at Morton Plant Hospital, it was already too late. Terry Bollea, or as he was better known, Hulk Hogan, was pronounced dead just before noon. He was 71 years old. News of the wrestling icon's death spread faster than anyone in Clearwater was prepared for. Within an hour, fans had gathered outside the hospital, some even wearing shirts bearing his old ring name. The World Wrestling Entertainment released a short statement calling him the man who built the stage the rest of us stand on. The next day, tribute murals had already started appearing on storefronts across the city. They were painted overnight by people who'd never met him, but felt like they'd lost someone close. That was the kind of connection that Bollea had built with the public over a career that lasted more than 3 decades. The explanation of his death seemed obvious enough. Bollea had spent most of his life getting thrown and slammed in the ring. His body had been rebuilt by surgeons more times than anyone could count. The career that made him a worldwide icon had taken its toll on him. The medical examiner's office ruled it a heart attack. For most people, that was the end of the story. But Bollea hadn't looked like a man in decline. Friends said he'd been training again. His wife, Sky Daly, told anyone who asked that he'd found real peace in his final years. He was eating clean and meditating daily. She said that in his final years, he had become a calmer, healthier version of himself. That painted a very clear, contradicting picture. A man supposedly thriving one week and gone the next. That was the first thing that didn't sit right with the officers who responded to the scene. Adding on top of that was the fact that something about the house itself felt off to the police. So Clearwater PD decided the case needed a second look before it was closed. That decision opened a door nobody expected. And it all started with a room that was too clean, too organized. A gym too clean. Investigators went straight for Bollea's home gym first, since everyone close to him agreed it was the one room he never neglected. It was supposed to be the most lived-in space in the entire house. Instead, it looked untouched. The equipment sat in perfect rows. No sweat towels, no water bottles, none of the small clutter that piles up when a room is actually being used. Reports said that he trained daily, but the gym looked like it was prepared for a display or a photograph. It did not look like anyone had trained there in a very long time. Lead detective Rosa Alvarez, who'd worked homicide for over a decade, later told colleagues that it was the quiet that got to her first. You walk into a house where someone just died, and usually there's a mess somewhere. Something knocked over, something left mid-task. This house looked like it had been arranged for a walkthrough. That instinct, more than any one clue, was what pushed her to believe that something sinister was going on. Alvarez acted on that instinct and conducted a more thorough search of the property. That's when they started finding one unexplainable thing after another, starting with a security system that had been turned off. Bollea had installed a state-of-the-art home security system around the entire property. But when Alvarez and her team pulled the records, they found the entire system had been shut down, manually and from inside the house, hours before anyone called for help. It was not a malfunction or a power outage. Someone had walked up to the panel and turned it off on purpose. There was no sign of a break-in. Every door and window was undisturbed, which meant only two explanations were possible. Either Bollea disabled his own security that night, or someone he trusted enough to be inside the house did it for him. Digital forensics teams spent days combing through smart home logs, trying to reconstruct who had been moving through the house in its final hours. The system had clearly been turned off. And with the house refusing to give up its secret, investigators turned to the one lead that might actually give them some answers. The people Bollea had spoken to in his last days. The call. 3 nights before he died, Bollea received a phone call late in the night. Nobody who was with him at the time could understand what the voice on the phone said, but what they could describe, and they did so in detail, was what happened to his face while he listened. Sky said she'd never seen him look like that. This was a man who'd spent his whole career performing in front of thousands of people, no matter who the opponent was. This was the man who had stood against giants and titans and never once looked even slightly nervous. Fear simply didn't exist in Bollea's vocabulary. But after that call ended, she said the look on his face was unmistakable. For the first time, the man known as Hulk Hogan was afraid. When investigators tried to trace the call, the trail resisted them at every turn. It had been routed through a chain of servers scattered across different countries. Whoever made that call had gone to extreme lengths to make sure it couldn't be traced back to them. It showed a level of technical effort that isn't cheap, isn't easy, and isn't accidental. Investigators floated a few theories. A warning, an extortion attempt, someone leaning on Bollea over information he was holding. None of the theories had any evidence to back them up, but everyone working the case agreed on one thing. This call wasn't random, and it left a mark on him that the following 3 days did nothing to erase. To understand why someone might have wanted to rattle Terry Bollea, investigators had to look past the celebrity and into the parts of his life that never made the highlight reels. The trail started with a family that had far more cracks in it than the public ever saw. A family built on fractures. Bollea's public image had always been the invincible showman, and for a long time his family looked like it matched that image. His marriage to Linda Claridge in the early 80s, for years the family played out on camera as the picture-perfect household, most famously in the reality show that turned their home life into television. At its peak, the family's reality show pulled in millions of viewers a week. It turned breakfast table arguments and driving lessons into some of the most watched television of the decade. Bollea leaned into the role of doting father completely. That image became inseparable from who he actually was. The family had built its whole public identity around looking unbreakable. Rumors of infidelity surfaced in the mid-2000s. Bollea denied them, but the marriage collapsed anyway. And Bollea later admitted the fallout pushed him into severe depression. He had even considered ending his life, and he remarried a few years later to Jennifer McDaniel. It was a quiet ceremony that stayed mostly out of the headlines. That marriage lasted over a decade before ending just as quietly as it started. Then came Sky Daly in his final years, a relationship friends said genuinely changed him. But not everyone in the family shared that peace. His daughter Brooke had drifted away from him years earlier, worn down by old scandals and a relationship that never fully healed. She skipped his wedding to Sky and kept her distance from most family events afterward. When Bollea's will surfaced after his death, that distance became something sharper. His son Nick was named sole heir to an estate worth close to $5 million. Brooke was left out entirely. For investigators, that detail couldn't be ignored. A will that cut one child out completely while handing everything to the other was the kind of lead that demanded a closer look. But family tension alone couldn't explain the physical mystery still sitting at the center of the case. The question of what exactly had gone wrong inside Bollea's own body just weeks before he died. That led the investigators to the surgery performed just weeks before he died that may have set something in motion that nobody caught in time. The surgery that followed him. By his 70s, Bollea's body was a receipt of everything the ring had taken from him. Decades of hard landings and dangerous stunts had left him with more than 24 surgeries. That kind of physical toll does not simply get fixed with time. The most serious of those procedures happened just weeks before his death. A major operation on his neck, fusing several damaged discs in his upper spine to relieve pressure that had been building for years. It's a serious surgery under the best circumstances, but for a man in his 70s already managing a blood disorder and an irregular heartbeat, the risks were considerably higher than average. There's a specific danger with that kind of neck surgery that doesn't always show up right away. A nerve running from the spine down into the chest controls the muscle responsible for breathing. If that nerve gets disturbed during the operation, a patient can experience sudden breathing failure with almost no warning. It can even happen weeks after the surgery. In the days after the operation, rumors spread fast that Bollea was in far worse shape than the public was being told. Sky pushed back hard against that narrative, insisting he was strong, recovering well, and nowhere near as fragile as people were saying. For a while, the evidence seemed to back her up. He was photographed smiling with fans, doing light workouts. He looked like a man on the way back to his feet. But when investigators laid his final timeline next to what they knew about that surgery, an uncomfortable possibility took shape. If that nerve had been quietly damaged during the operation, his breathing could have failed suddenly. That would have triggered exactly the kind of cardiac emergency that killed him, weeks after everyone assumed he was in the clear. It reframed his death as something that might not have been purely natural decline, but a complication nobody caught in time. And just as investigators were weighing that theory, a second search of the mansion turned up something that had nothing to do with medicine at all. The room no one knew. During a follow-up sweep of the house, agents found something built into the basement that shouldn't have existed. Behind what looked like an ordinary section of wall was a concealed room, practically invisible unless you already knew exactly where to look and how to open it. There were no handles, no hinges, no seams. It didn't appear on any blueprint, any renovation permit, or any record of the property the county had. Inside this room, they found an archive. Files stacked and labeled with real care. Personal correspondence, financial records, legal documents. All organized like something maintained carefully over years, not thrown together in a hurry. Some of the paperwork was dated the day before Bollea died. He'd been actively using this room right up until the very end. Most of the files were ordinary enough, just medical paperwork or financial statements, but mixed in were references to people and dealings that had never surfaced anywhere in his public life. A few documents that investigators examined carefully suggested these records weren't just meant for keeping information. They may have been used to pressure or control people. Whether Bollea had built this archive to protect himself from something, or whether its existence had put a target on him in the first place. These were questions nobody could answer yet. Officially, investigators said little. The case stayed open, no conclusions were announced, and requests for more detail about the room went nowhere. For his family, the room complicated everything. They thought they knew Terry, the wrestling star of the late 1900s and the calm and healthy person who had grown beyond the chaos of his younger years. These were versions of him they had made peace with. Now, alongside that, existed another version. A person who'd apparently felt the need to keep a hidden archive nobody else knew about. Reconciling all of them as one person turned out to be harder than anyone expected. Versions of one man. That, in the end, is the real tension at the heart of this story. But two versions of the same person sitting side by side, refusing to fully agree with each other. One version is the man everyone around him described in his final years, finally at peace after decades of turbulence. A man who'd found something like calm with sky by his side. The other version is the man investigators kept running into at every turn. Someone maintaining a hidden room, receiving an untraceable call that visibly frightened him. That's what makes the case so hard to close cleanly. A man who was genuinely at peace in his daily life could still be quietly carrying something heavy enough to need a locked room and receive calls from an untraceable number. That tension is exactly why the case refused to wrap up as a simple story about an aging athlete's heart finally giving out. Every piece of hard evidence, the disabled security system, the untraceable call, the hidden archive, pointed toward a man who knew or feared something. But in his final days, he never got the chance to explain to the people closest to him what it was, which leaves his legacy sitting in an unusual place. He is celebrated everywhere for what he built in the ring, and unresolved everywhere else. An unfinished legacy. Terry Bollea's career reshaped an entire industry. He was the face that carried professional wrestling out of smoky arenas and into mainstream culture. The man whose famous slam of Andre the Giant became one of the most replayed moments in the sport's history. Performers who came after him, from Dwayne Johnson to John Cena, have openly credited him with building the stage their own careers stood on. His death, though, never settled as cleanly as his career did. The official cause was heart failure, worsened by his blood condition and decades of physical wear. For most people, that explanation was enough. It matched his age, his medical history, and a body that had been through a lot of punishment. For others, the details that surfaced afterward made that explanation feel incomplete. A disabled security system nobody could explain. A call designed to be untraceable. A hidden room built and maintained in total secrecy. A surgery with a complication that was never fully ruled out. None of it proved wrongdoing on its own, but together, it left a case that never quite closed the way everyone expected it to. His estate went entirely to his son, while his daughter was left out completely. A decision that still divides people who followed the story closely. Sky has said she plans to pursue further answers about his final surgery. The investigation, as of the most recent update, remains technically open, without a final public conclusion. In the end, we are left with two stories. One tells of the man who helped shape the sport we know today. The other remains unfinished, leaving behind questions that still have no answers. So, what do you think really happened to Terry Bollea? Did he die by natural causes? Or is there something darker at play? Let me know your thoughts about this in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next mystery we dig into. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.